Alright, so for number 24, we want to find the exact value of each of these sine, cosine, tangent, cotan, secant, and cosecant functions. And to do that, we're going to use the unit circle. So first off, if I want to find the sine of pi over 6, then I have to think to myself, where on the unit circle is pi over 6? Pi over 6 is actually in the first quadrant. So since pi over 6 is in the first quadrant, I know that sine is going to be a positive value. I also know that on a unit circle, each point on the unit circle is represented by x comma y. The x value is always the cosine value, and the y value is always the sine value. So therefore, I know that root 3 over 2 comma 1/2, I know that the sine of pi over 6 is 1/2. The cosine 5 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4 on the unit circle is in the third quadrant. The angle that corresponds with that is 225. And then what I want to do is I want to think that in the third quadrant, cosine is negative. And then at that value, cosine is root 2 over 2 because I have a reference angle of 45 degrees. So therefore, I can say that my cosine of 5 pi over 4 is negative root 2 over 2. Another thing that you need to be aware of is the value of tangent at each of the given angles in the first quadrant. So tangent is equal to sine over cosine. So again, x is cosine, y is sine. So if I take the y value and put it over the x value, then I will get the tan value. So for this one, I would take root 3 over 2 and put it over 1/2. Simplifying that will just give me root 3. So the tan value of pi over 6 is root 3. The tan value of root 2 over 2 over root 2 over 2 is 1. And finally, the tan value here is root 3 over 3. Tan value here is undefined because x is 0, which means here tan is also undefined. Here tan is 0. So with all of that in mind, if I'm looking at 5 pi over 3, 5 pi over 3 is going to be in the fourth quadrant. The fourth quadrant, tangent is negative. So I know my tan value is negative. I'm also looking at a reference angle of 60 degrees. Therefore, since my reference angle is 60 degrees, and it's negative, if I look at the 60-degree angle in my first quadrant, I will notice my tan value is root 3 over 3. So my tan value of 5 pi over 3 is negative root 3 over 3. Okay? So that's what you're going to do for all of these. Maybe some of the ones that you might be wondering about are the negative. So if I'm taking the negative tangent of negative 7 pi over 4, on my coordinate plane, if you look, 7 pi over 4 is in the fourth quadrant, which means I start here and I go all the way around to 7 pi over 4, which is basically 315 degrees. Well, I'm taking the tangent of negative 7 pi over 4. I'm going to actually go the other direction, which I'm going to go the same distance around, which is 7 pi over 4. And now instead of ending in the fourth quadrant, I actually end in the first quadrant. And again, 7 pi over 4 has a reference angle of 45 degrees, which is going to have that same reference angle here in my negative 7 pi over 4. So therefore, I know that my answer is 1. You're going to do the same thing with cosine instead of going positive 4 pi over 3. So instead of going from here all the way around to 240 degrees, which is 4 pi over 3, then I will start from here and I will go the opposite direction. So that means I will end actually in the second quadrant. And in the second quadrant, cosine is negative, and then the corresponding cosine value is negative 1/2. For sine of negative 11 pi over 6, you're going to start and you're going to go negative 11 pi over 6, which will put you all the way around to the value in the first quadrant, which sine in the first quadrant is 1/2. Pi over 4, that's in the first quadrant, that's just root 2 over 2. 5 pi over 6 is in the second quadrant, so you're going to start here and go to the second quadrant. Cosine is negative in that quadrant, which is root 3 over 2. Tangent 7 pi over 6 is root 3 over 3. And I just caught my error on letter C. So letter C should actually be just negative root 3. I actually have these values here. So this should actually be this should actually be 1/2, because it's sine over cosine, which would give me root 3 over 2, root 3 over 3, and then this is just root 3. Alright, so then secant is going to be the reciprocal of cosine. So if I find cosine and I take the reciprocal, then I will get my secant value. So 5 pi over 4, typically I would start here and go around to 5 pi over 4. But I want the cosine of negative 5 pi over 4. So I start here and I go around negative 5 pi over 4, which will put me here. And then after I get here, then I know that secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So I'm going to take and flip root 2 over 2. And when I flip root 2 over 2, the reciprocal of that is 2 over root 2. And if I rationalize the denominator, then I'm left with 2 root 2 over 2, and the 2's cancel out, and I'm left with just negative root 2. Cotangent of 5 pi over 6, I'm going to go around to 5 pi over 6. My reference angle is 30 degrees, which means it would be root 3 over 3. However, I want cotangent, so I take the reciprocal and I'm left with negative root 3. Cosecant is the opposite of sine, so if I find the sine and take the reciprocal, then I will have my cosecant value. So 4 pi over 3 is typically in the third quadrant, or is in the third quadrant, and sine in the third quadrant is negative. That value for sine for 4 pi over 3 would be negative root 3 over 2. However, I want the reciprocal of that, so that's 2 over root 3. Rationalize the denominator and you're left with negative 2 root 3 over 3.